cannot let them take our land.
We have to do something. This is our livelihood.
She screamed, "This land belongs to me," like she was the sheriff of some dusty Wild West HOA. And there I was, half laughing, half trembling, because nothing about it made sense. I hadn't even been on the ranch a week before strangers in reflective vests started circling my fence like scavengers. My porch had turned into their stage, my driveway into their courtroom, and somehow I was already cast as the villain, judged guilty before anyone even asked a single question. They murmured about community rules, pointed at my barn, and even pretended to jot down official notes while neighbors peeked through their windows as though it was a live show. Tell me in the comments if you've ever had a neighbor this bold or this delusional. I was installing a saddle rack to dry my gear when a vehicle marked Community Standards rolled up my driveway. Gravel cracked under the tires as they stopped in front of my barn. Out stepped Malene in a blazer, her eyes sweeping over my small barn and wooden fence with obvious disapproval. She slapped a folder down on my fence post like a judge's gavel. "That barn and fence are blocking the shared mountain view for our community," she declared. I set my hammer aside, poured lemonade from the pitcher on my porch, and replied, "My house isn't in your HOA?" Rebecca from next door glanced over from her garden, watched the whole scene unfold, shook her head like she'd seen this before, and walked off. Her body language said she knew exactly what kind of confrontation this was. Let me be perfectly clear. County records show my property was never part of your HOA plat. You have no authority here. That night, I spread my property deed out across the kitchen table under the lamp, double-checking. Confirmed, not part of any HOA. The legal description couldn't be clearer. But Malene was plotting something else. She demanded I lower my barn and fence to preserve the shared mountain view. She waved around self-printed view corridor guidelines that held no legal weight over my property. I thought, "Lady, this is not how property law works anywhere." But she truly seemed convinced that community preferences outrank individual property rights. The entitlement in her tone when she talked about shared views made my jaw tighten, as if buying a lot next to mine gave them veto power over what I build on my own land. Near the fence line, a fresh drainage channel cut through the soil, clearly dug from their side into my property without permission. I pulled out my phone and recorded a short video stating the date and showing the water flow as evidence. The soil was dark and damp, obviously freshly turned. Something about all of this felt wrong. I refused to lower my structures. Malene's voice rose, her agitation growing by the minute. "You'll have to comply. The view corridor is a community right." Her face flushed red. I stayed as calm as I could. "Ma'am, that's not how property law works. Any real estate attorney can confirm it. Inside, though, I was uneasy, a newcomer still learning the local personalities and their quirks. But my background as a water inspector let me recognize unauthorized drainage work instantly. Years of studying water flow patterns for municipalities had trained my eye. By the next morning, mulch from the HOA area had been deliberately spread along the edge of my property without permission, forming a ridge to divert rainwater away from their trail area. Clear trespassing. Clear modification. I wasn't imagining it. The evidence was right there. I installed a simple rain gauge near the altered area and began a ranch weather log, snapping digital photos each time it rained. Documenting their illegal water diversion became part of my daily routine. When Malene came back the following afternoon and saw me recording rainfall with my camera and notebook, her face turned bright red with frustration. Then she said the very words from the title. "This land is mine. You're interfering with community amenities." Her voice carried across the yard for the neighbors to hear. She motioned for the HOA patrol vehicle to angle its headlights at my porch like a spotlight. Hearing, "This land is mine," I was startled for a second. Then I actually chuckled. The contrast between my calm documentation and her total loss of control was almost funny, but also deeply unsettling. How far was she willing to go with this illegal behavior? I blocked my gate with a wooden beam, hung a sign that read, "Private ranch, no HOA authority," and stated firmly, "You're yelling at property that's not part of your HOA, but that illegal water diversion is trespassing." That night, I discovered fresh footprints around my rain gauge and something odd left in the dirt. Instead of an email or a direct complaint, I found a glossy flyer on my private property, Community View and Safety Day. calling for clearing vegetation. For fire safety and view liberation, misleading residents into believing my land was part of their project. The flyer looked official, professionally printed, and even falsely included my property in their voluntary compliance area. Photos of my barn and fence were circled in red, labeled obstructs community sightlines. A total misrepresentation with zero legal authority. The pictures were clearly taken from their side without my consent. Seeing my property used in their propaganda made my blood pressure spike. I picked up the wooden stake I'd found near my rain gauge the night before. It read Survey Garden and had a landscaping store sticker planted right at my boundary without notice. The wood was clean, smooth, no moss or weather marks, obviously placed recently and illegally. Rebecca walked over and examined it with me. "This looks fresh," she said, turning the stake in her hands. "Someone's been busy on your property without permission." Her background as a forensic accountant made her naturally attentive to details. She noted the store sticker was crisp and legible, not faded by sun or rain. We both noticed water stains with a faint greenish hue running along the drainage channel they'd carved. Rebecca sniffed the residue and made a face. "This cheap dye costs next to nothing at hardware stores. They're trying to trace water flow on your property without permission." The chemical scent was faint but clearly artificial, not natural minerals. The next morning I spotted more of that green dye near the HOA fence. Not mine. The trail ran along the trench into my side, still fresh. Rebecca appeared behind me, holding her phone. "They tried tracing water from their side last night," she said, showing me a shaky night video of HOA workers pouring green liquid by flashlight. "They figured you wouldn't notice." "Looks like they beat you to the punch," a neighbor muttered, unimpressed. The idea of being outmaneuvered on my own property made my blood boil. My credibility wasn't just dented, it was under attack. Rebecca suggested trying again on a dry day, using controlled water flow instead of waiting on natural rainfall. Maybe use less water and tighten the conditions. She advises in a measured voice, "The scientific method demands control of all variables." 2 days later, I repeat the test, this time carefully regulating the garden hose flow. After 15 minutes of close watching, a vivid green hue clearly emerges in the water collection pit on my land. All 3 neighbors stare, visibly stunned by the unmistakable evidence of drainage tampering. One audibly gasps. "I had no idea they were doing this to your property," she whispers. Rebecca snaps a series of quick photos, then nods with resolve. One neighbor clamps a hand over her mouth. Another begins filming on their phone. "They were doing this behind all of us," someone breathes, still shocked. The green stream is glowing across the trench line like it's been drawn with a marker. When the color shows so clearly, I address the witnesses aloud. "Water doesn't lie about property lines." My hands tremble as I speak. My voice catches slightly. This proof makes the situation feel heavier, more serious, more legally significant than I'd expected. This isn't just neighbor drama anymore. Rebecca films short clips of each stage for documentation, speaking carefully as she records. This evidence clearly shows drainage modification without the landowner's consent. I take my own handheld footage of the colored water, flowing from the community trail directly through the illegally altered channel onto my property during our controlled water test. The green dye makes the flow path impossible to dispute. Then, at midnight, the landline shrills, an unknown number. I answer, heavy breathing, then a whisper. "Stop tracing." Click. Dead air. No ID, just private caller. My throat dries like I've swallowed sand. Someone is watching, worried about what I'll prove next. I'm nervous about this escalating harassment, but relieved that the evidence now proves the illegal drainage changes beyond any doubt. Derek, I've heard some group is claiming fire safety authority on your property. That's illegal impersonation of county officials if they're not certified, Stephen's voice says, sounding genuinely concerned. I sit up straighter, surprised by an early morning call from someone in county range management. Something serious is happening. Stephen explains that real fire safety inspections require proper certification, written notice, and the property owner's consent. These volunteer groups have zero legal authority on private land, he says firmly, like someone who's seen this before. His seriousness validates my concerns about their tactics. Malene soon appears leading 5 people in bright yellow vests labeled Firewise Volunteer as they cross onto my property, falsely claiming they have authority to order me to clear brush and grass 30 feet to CAL FIRE standards, standing surrounded by 5 yellow vests. I feel ambushed. Something about their authority seems off. Their vests look brand new, as if bought yesterday. Real officials wear weathered gear and carry proper ID badges. These people have only clipboards and attitude, no real credentials. One even tries to hand me a citation obviously printed on regular paper, not an official government form. Then Stephen arrives in his county vehicle, raising his badge toward Malene in plain view. Ma'am, impersonating fire safety officials is a misdemeanor. These volunteers have no legal authority on private property. Legitimate fire safety clearance requires written notice and property owner consent. The fake volunteers shift nervously, avoiding eye contact. One woman quietly slips off her vest. Stephen points at a fresh tree stump near the fence, raw cut, sap still wet. It's obvious this was done only months ago without permission. He pauses, letting the pale wood speak for itself. No gray weathering, just exposed truth. Someone cut this mature tree very recently to move my boundary marker illegally. Stephen takes photos and writes notes on his official clipboard. This constitutes property damage and boundary tampering, he states for the record. The imposters grow more uneasy. Stephen also identifies that the wet mulch dumped by the HOA on my property without permission is actually a fire hazard, not a safety measure. If fire safety were really the goal, I say with growing satisfaction, we'd remove this illegal mulch first. It ignites faster than tissue once it dries. Stephen nods grimly, documenting the mulch pile as a hazard. I dig a small hole at the boundary marker and discover the topsoil has been freshly disturbed and compacted. Grass roots cut clean, still white from recent slicing. Stephen examines the soil with a tight voice. This boundary marker was illegally moved. No permits, no approval. The evidence stacks higher against their unlawful actions. When the fake Firewise group returns with even more people to intimidate me, I momentarily consider backing down. Maybe I'm overreacting, but Stephen's official presence gives my position legal weight. He's real, credentials and all. Not some volunteer in a store-bought vest. Stephen affixes a bright red tag to the mulch pile, writing boldly, "Fire hazard, illegal dumping, remove immediately," and hands Malene a citation stamped with the county seal. "You have 48 hours to remove this material," he tells her sternly. The citation carries genuine legal power and fines. I plant bamboo stakes in a straight line matching the recorded boundary measurements and hang a clear sign. No HOA authority, county-verified property line. The stakes form a visible barrier no one can ignore or claim confusion over. Later that afternoon, a Greenview LLC truck parks near the HOA area. 2 workers measure distances by the community trail. Glancing directly at my property, I'm furious about the impersonation and illegal tree cutting, but reassured that legitimate county authority has now confirmed my rights. Stephen's red tag isn't just a warning, it's my first shield in this battle they started. Instead of confronting me outright, Malene changes tactics. She circulates a Preserve Our Mountain Views petition packed with false claims about my property rights and even arranges wellness checks implying I'm an unstable neighbor to pressure me into compliance. The petition looks official, professionally printed, convincing residents unfamiliar with the facts. 20 residents sign it, demanding I lower my barn for view obstruction, based entirely on Malene's misinformation. People start knocking on my door, pretending concern for my mental health because I'm resisting the community. Leadership, a clear harassment. Strategy to make me seem unreasonable, several. Neighbors mention they're worried about my stress and suggest I compromise for everyone's peace of mind. I respond by showing them my actual paperwork. I've got my title, deed, and property. Survey right here. Want to take a look? My land was never tied to any HOA contract. Some of the neighbors looked genuinely stunned, as if the version of events they'd been told was completely different. A few even asked to see the paperwork for themselves, so I laid the documents out across my kitchen table for them to inspect. The deed spells it out clearly. My property boundaries and legal description, with no mention whatsoever of HOA restrictions or covenants. Several neighbors admitted they'd been fed misleading information. "We were told you were just being difficult about following community standards," one woman said softly, almost apologizing. "No one told us your property wasn't actually in the HOA. I decided to host an open porch session where evidence, not opinions, would speak." I invited 5 neighbors, 1 HOA representative, and a flood control technician, no shouting matches, just a straightforward demonstration of what was really happening with the drainage. Stephen arrived with his surveying equipment, laying boundary maps right next to the cut tree by the fence. "Here's the official record," he explained, showing the group where a boundary marker had been moved without authorization just a few months earlier. Neighbors leaned in to study the stamped county documents. The dates and maps left no room for debate. It was undeniable proof of tampering. Stephen's expertise gave the evidence real weight. I then showed them a small test hole I dug near the marker. The soil was clearly disturbed, different colored layers mixed unnaturally, grass roots freshly severed with white cut marks still visible. The technician examined it closely and confirmed what I already suspected. "This marker was moved recently without approval or proper surveying procedure," he said. The facts were plain, visible to anyone with their own eyes. Next, I carefully prepared a soil probe test, walking everyone through the process step by step. "This scanner will show us where the layers were disrupted," I explained. I passed the handheld device over the suspected drainage alteration, but after 10 minutes the screen remained blank. Panic set in. I felt sweat on my palms and almost dropped the scanner, terrified I'd look like a paranoid fool in front of half the neighborhood. Deputy Luke Blake showed up after being called about the dispute. He quietly took notes on the harassment campaign and the altered property line. His presence shifted the entire tone. Suddenly, everyone spoke more cautiously, realizing this was no longer petty neighborhood drama, but a matter being documented by law enforcement. Then, 20 minutes later, the breakthrough happened. Bright green color lit up in the water collection pit on my land. Everyone could see it for themselves, the altered drainage channel directing water illegally from their property onto mine. The flood control technician immediately asked for copies of my photos for the official record and scheduled a formal violation investigation. "This powder shows exactly where the water flows," I told the witnesses. "It runs straight from their land to mine through an illegal cut." There was no space left for denial. It was visible proof. One neighbor who had signed the HOA petition looked mortified. "I signed because I trusted the president's claims. I didn't realize we were misled." Others nodded, realizing the truth for the first time. When the green tracer appeared, I felt vindicated. No social media battles, no smear campaigns, just a few spoonfuls of powder and simple physics. Deputy Blake documented everything: unauthorized drainage work, tampered markers, organized harassment. The real question now was whether to compromise with people who had lied or stand firm. For me, the choice was clear. Property rights outweigh neighborhood popularity contests. Later, Meline stood silently at my gate, red-eyed from crying, clutching a document behind her back. By Tuesday morning, an official multi-agency inspection team arrived: flood control, range management, and code compliance. They pulled up in marked county vehicles armed with clipboards, cameras, measuring devices, and full legal authority. This was no longer a neighborhood squabble. It had escalated to a government investigation with potential criminal consequences. I was handed a formal-looking letter accusing me of fire code violations. Even though my property wasn't under HOA jurisdiction at all, the lead inspector explained the process in a calm but firm tone. "We've received multiple reports of unauthorized drainage changes and boundary tampering. This is now a county matter." Meline then produced a forged stop work letter with a fake seal, still convinced community pressure could override property law. She waved it in front of the inspector, declaring, "The community has voted," and consensus was reached. Her tone carried the same entitlement it always had. She truly believed HOA democracy outweighed state regulations. The inspector glanced at the fake paperwork, then set it aside. "Ma'am, fabricated documents don't replace state law or property rights. We're here about unauthorized drainage and boundary tampering," he replied matter-of-factly. Her face fell when she realized her petition had no standing. 3 violations were recorded with precision: unauthorized stormwater diversion, backed by my weather logs and photos; marker tampering, proven through Stephen's tree ring analysis and disturbed soil; trespassing and damage shown through repeated unauthorized entry. Everything was photographed from multiple angles with professional surveying gear. The record was airtight. Still desperate, Meline insisted the community vote made the modifications acceptable. The inspector ignored her protest while measuring the altered slope with advanced equipment. Artificial grade modification redirecting runoff without permit or easement, he noted. This is a violation of state drainage law. He then issued a stop work order. All changes must cease immediately. Any violation would bring $500 daily fines and potential criminal charges. Copies were posted publicly by the trail and sent to the HOA board. Residents who had supported the project now looked uneasy, realizing serious violations had occurred under their watch. As questions spread, why wasn't proper approval obtained? I sat at my table staring at the citation. The inspector stamped the final report, his words cutting through the tension. Gravity and property law share one truth. They don't bend to opinion. He gave Malene 48 hours to restore the drainage and remove materials, warning of fines and prosecution. The gravity of the county probe made me uneasy, yet validated. For once, real authority had confirmed what I'd been saying all along. Before leaving, the inspector asked if I had contacts who could access older land records. He suspected these violations were part of a longer history. Sure enough, Rebecca later dug through county spending records and uncovered that the HOA had been deliberately splitting drainage, mulch, and trimming contracts to avoid competitive bidding, an outright procurement violation with potential criminal implications. She spread the highlighted documents across my kitchen table, proof of something much bigger than anyone had imagined. Look at these dates and dollar figures, she says flatly. They're staying just beneath the bidding threshold on purpose. Once Rebecca maps it out, the pattern is obvious. Identical contracts issued in the same window, same crews, same equipment, just chopped into smaller chunks so oversight never kicks in. She calls it classic contract splitting, arranging the files in a clean timeline that makes the fraud undeniable. While I'm still trying to grasp the full scale, the Greenview contractor calls me directly, his voice full of menace as he threatens liens and padded restoration costs if I refuse. I keep calm, telling him any illegal invoices can go straight to my attorney, and I hang up before his intimidation escalates. By morning, I'm in the county archives with a land record expert spreading out brittle plat maps and faded deeds that reveal half a century of missing pieces. One entry stops me cold, 10 acres shifted quietly, no payment, no explanation, simply erased into a ledger. I photograph every questionable page, label the folder patterns of HOA greed, and leave with evidence that both confirms my suspicions and raises heavier questions. Neighbors stop me later, asking about the county's investigation. I explain splitting contracts to stay below bidding limits is procurement fraud under state law. Anyone who's dealt with government contracts recognizes it instantly. Rebecca nods hard, pointing to clear evidence. Multiple contracts for identical work. Same crews, same machines, just divided to dodge oversight rules. Greenview LLC's license lists Linda Pierce as registered agent, with the exact same address as Malene's home. That's a glaring conflict of interest and almost certainly financial fraud. Rebecca traces it carefully. Same address, same family name. Contracts funneled without competition. This isn't just HOA abuse anymore, it's organized. Family-run corruption using association funds for personal gain. I want to be furious, and I almost laugh at the absurdity. But mostly I feel sorry for the residents being robbed by the very people they trusted. Their monthly fees fueled the scam. At an emergency meeting, when a board member presses Malene about hiding her family's business ties, she grows defensive and evasive. My sister runs a legitimate landscaping business, she insists, though her voice trembles. The board pushes harder on disclosure and bidding rules, but Malene can't answer even basic questions. Rebecca demonstrates that when all these separate contracts are added together, the totals far exceed bidding thresholds, with the same crews cycling through duplicate jobs. That proof triggers a county criminal probe into contract splitting and concealed conflicts of interest. I watch as Malene's confidence cracks under the weight of exposure. Subpoenaed bank statements show HOA money flowing straight into Linda Pierce's accounts with no approvals. Soon the county announces charges: procurement fraud, conspiracy, and misuse of HOA funds, serious crimes carrying prison time and heavy fines. Rebecca uncovers that Greenview LLC was created only 6 months before Malene began funneling it contracts, premeditated fraud. I stay quiet during the widening investigation, saddened that their family built a business model around betraying neighbors. On a crisp Thursday, the county surveyor arrives to install permanent markers. The tampered garden stakes are replaced by official monuments with GPS coordinates, laser tools, and legal records. No more backyard guesswork, no more boundary games. Tension fills the community hall when the county's notice goes public. Real names, real charges. Malene shouts, but her voice is drowned out. Someone slams a binder of HOA fee records on the table. "This is theft," a woman hisses. I stay near the back, this time holding a folder with every document, ready if anyone asks who uncovered it. Rebecca projects the payment trail on a giant screen. HOA fees, contractor names, routing numbers. The room falls silent. Some demand a recall, others audits. One man tears his HOA badge in half on camera. The surveyor explains his process as he works, logging GPS coordinates into county and state records. No one can claim confusion again. His precise professionalism stands in stark contrast to the sloppy, self-serving alterations that sparked all of this. Malene makes one last desperate claim about a community view easement based on long usage. Stephen responds firmly, pointing to the official survey. "Ma'am, easements require legal recording and owner consent. You have neither. An adverse possession takes 20 years of open, continuous use." Her argument collapses under real property law. The surveyor even uncovers the original granite boundary marker hidden under mulch. I run my hand over the weathered stone, older than the subdivision itself. Finally vindicated, Stephen confirms on record that my property was never part of the HOA plat, making every attempt at enforcement void. His words echo what I've been saying all along. Inside the hall, residents turn on Malene. Some storm out on livestream, others shout in her defense. "Chaos replaces unity." Luke steadies the room, explaining that her claims of community consensus were pure fiction. The land was private, with no possible prescriptive easement. Within a week, legal resolution unfolds. Misdemeanor charges against Malene for harassment, trespass, and property damage. Civil liability against the HOA for repairs and damages. Felony procurement fraud charges against both Pierce sisters, with prison time on the table. Daily fines accrue until full restoration is complete. Malene is removed as HOA president while awaiting trial, suspended by unanimous board vote. Other residents approach me privately, asking about their own property rights and voicing concerns about questionable spending under her leadership. The fallout spreads far beyond my case. The county announces new oversight for all associations in the region, stricter transparency rules and audits to prevent this kind of fraud again. Court orders require full restoration. Unauthorized materials removed, natural drainage restored, permanent markers installed, soil remediated where contaminated mulch was dumped. Professional crews under county supervision handle everything properly this time. And at sunset, standing beside the restored marker, I finally exhale a breath I'd held too long. The granite glows in the fading light. Maybe the real lesson is this. Property lines aren't negotiable, laws don't bend to shouting, and truth never needed a vote to stand firm. If you're still here, tell me, how did this one land? Heavy? Satisfying? Both? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you think I did well, a kind word goes a long way as I keep building this channel. If you'd like to support, there's always the little thanks button below. Tonight, I'll leave the ranch in quiet, letting silence finally speak louder than all the noise. Thanks for watching.